Hi everyone. This video is a book review about a book that I came across in the thrift store of all places. And the title of this book is Orphan Train. And it was written by Verla Kay and illustrated by Ken Stark. Now, sometimes every other weekend I'll go to the thrift store to add more books to my collection. And I usually get a bunch of children's books, and while I was going through the children's books, I came across this book. The only reason that I picked up this book was because of the title, which was Orphan Trains. The first time I found out about orphan trains was when I was working for the library. I was shelving books in the history section upstairs, and there was a book called The Orphan Trains of Missouri. So I'm like, what is an orphan train? So I thought it was pretty cool that there was a children's book about it. So before I tell you a little bit about this book and the orphan trains, let me share a little bit of information with you about the author. And I have to look online for their bio because I couldn't find it in my little book. So, the author. Her name is Verla Kay. And it says, Verla Kay, author of beautiful, poetic, historical books for young children, is renowned for helping other writers and illustrators on their journey to publication. She loves many things, including reading, writing, travel, cooking, sewing, scrapbooking, gardening, puzzles of all kinds, and playing games, board, cards, and video games. Verla gives dynamic talks and workshops to adults and children, and has a fervent desire to make history and learning fun for children through books. Now, with this lady, I noticed that most of her books take place in like colonial times. She has one called Tattered Sails, which looks like it's about it's a family sails from London to Boston in the 1600s. Then she has Hornbooks and Inkwells, which looks like a one-room schoolhouse, and covered wagons and gold, and it's very interesting. She has, a theme, an era theme. So that is Verla Kay. Now, the illustrator, Ken Stark, he was kind of a challenge to find because I was trying to figure out if I had the right person, because on his website, there's nothing with illustrations, but it says online, hold on. He says on his website, writer, painter, blogger. Yep, that's me over there trying his best to look all cool and candid. Feel free to peruse. Feel free to peruse my humble offerings at your leisure. I've posted a few excerpts from my published and unpublished works. You'll find a few free short stories cleverly hidden under the button. And on his website, there's no children's book illustrations at all. So that's why I was confused if I had the same illustrator, because his website is all like horror novels, horror fiction. And it's a whole different genre. It's not like the little paintings of Orphan Train. But if it is the same person, I think he has a very beautiful artwork. I admired it greatly. I believe he may have used oil, but I am not sure. So, before I get started on the book, at the beginning of this book, they give a little history about the orphan trains. This was published in 2003, so it's been almost 10 years since this book was published. It's been about 8 years so far. And it says, author's note, between 1854 and 1929, up to 150,000 children from overcrowded East Coast cities, mainly New York and Boston, were loaded onto trains that took them westward to farming communities. So this is a little city right here. While most children were placed in Midwestern states, A few went as far as California. Many of the children were orphans, but some were children of ill parents or parents too poor to take care of them any longer. The children were paraded in front of the townsfolk at specified train stations and were picked by farmers for various reasons. Some were formally adopted, most were not. Some were treated as valued members of their new families. Others were taken in as unpaid laborers and were treated almost as slaves. See, almost as slaves. Babies and older boys were often the first to be chosen, as they were the most desirable. Babies didn't have any bad habits yet, and older boys could do a lot of work on the farms. Families were often separated, and many siblings never saw each other again, or even knew what happened to their brothers and sisters. The outrage people felt when they learned about the plight of many of these orphan train children helped to bring about adoption reform that made sure adoptive families were carefully screened, selected, and monitored to give children the best possible home. I just think this is just so the irony of it all. I don't know a lot about orphan trains, like except from the little bit that I've read and the little bit that I've read in this book. But my first impression about this orphan train thing is most of these children were non-Black children, because when I was reading this book and reading the author's note, she said they were treated almost as slaves, but they were not slaves. So I'm assuming that most of these children were white children. But I just thought it was kind of ironic that there were adoption reforms for these children, yet you had actual other children, Black children, that were enslaved. I'm just like, what's going on? And it's very sad because no child should be separated from their family. No child should have to wonder where their siblings or anything, wherever their siblings went. But if you're living in a society that's enslaving an entire race of people, like what do you expect? Anything could happen. I mean, even at that time, they were having children doing hard labor, working in factories day and night until they passed all those child labor laws later on. So yeah, children haven't really been treated that well until recently. And I wouldn't even say they're treated that well anymore, because you have sex trafficking and all of these different things that are happening to children, scientific experiments, being kidnapped, being in the foster system. This is very, very sad. So this book is written as poetry, which was a delightful surprise because I did not expect that when I first opened it. And if you know, I am a very big poetry fan, so the author wrote it in quatrains. It was very delightful but sad. So it starts off. Horses clip-clop, streets unclean, typhoid fever, quarantine. So you see all these people, it's a busy street. This girl right here, she's the main character. So typhoid fever, quarantine. So the whole setting of this book, it's a fictional story, historical fiction. It's, I guess, their own little pandemic going on, or their own plight going on, and she specifies it's typhoid fever. I can't remember exactly what typhoid fever is. I know there was a woman they called Typhoid Mary that spread typhoid fever, but it basically could kill you. So it was very dangerous to have this version of fever. So it says, parents coughing, shaking, chill, stomachs aching, deathly ill. So there are their parents over there being very ill. They probably have the typhoid fever. And over here are the children. See, this is this is Lucy. It says Lucy, Harold, David, frightened eyes, Lucy rocking, lullabies. So this page shows that the authority, the responsibility is being transferred from the children's dying parents over to Lucy. Because you see Lucy's face is so worried about what's going on with their parents. What will they do? And these two little boys are basically babies. Now, when I saw this page, it actually reminded me of my most recent video about Ida B. Wells Barnett. And Ida B. Wells Barnett was basically in the same situation, except her parents died of yellow fever. I don't know if yellow fever and typhoid fever are similar, but her parents died, I think, of yellow fever or scarlet fever. It's one of the fevers. And Ida B. Wells was 16 years old. So she had to take care of all of her siblings alone. Even though some relatives offered to help, she mostly raised most of her siblings. And she had to work, raise them, teach them, all of that. She became the mother and the father of the household. And that is a lot of responsibility for a child. So that's what that illustration reminded me of. And he really captured it. Like, look at the painterly style. Such beautiful artwork. Okay. Orphans begging on the street, threadbare clothing, filthy feet. So these children go from having a home to just being on the street. And look at these people just turning. How can you turn a child away? I literally don't understand. Look, what type of world is this? How can you turn away a hungry child? I literally don't get it. I literally don't understand. Now, an adult, okay, I could see some people turning away an adult. Some adults end up in situations because they like have mental illness or they're injured. They can't do anything about it because they have a mental illness or they're injured. But then some, they're like, I choose to be in this predicament. Others, it's just circumstances. Their spirit is broken. It all varies. So with an adult, you're just like, okay, you have to just pick and choose. But what about a child? A child can't control anything. A child can't go out and get a job. A child can't sign contracts. They literally can't do anything. And you're just going to let these children be on the street and you in your fine clothes. But as I said, if you're living in a society that enslaved and broke apart families, what do you expect? People putting children in factories to work day and night. No rights. Just like today. Having children being sexualized and sent off to child trafficking and whatnot. Having them be in medical experiments for all these different people. Like, that's why you have to have child advocates now. Because whatever happens in childhood will affect your entire life. There are people who became serial killers just from a messed up childhood. So I just thought that was pretty sad. Snowflakes drifting, winter night, stone cold doorstep huddled tight. No church is taking these children. Like, you don't even have a church coming to get these kids. You're just watching them on the street. Lucy stealing, telling lies. David whimpers, Harold cries. So now they're in survival mode. I mean, you're not helping me because I'm an innocent child. So now I have to do what I have to do to feed my family, you see? You see this? I think this illustration, this page right here, is a very important page because this is the breaking point where you can either choose a life of crime or go in a completely different path if there isn't an intervention. How many children have turned to a life of crime or joining a gang because nobody was there that cared? Nobody was there to lead them in the right path. I remember there was this man who was, I don't know which white supremacist group he joined. It was either the Klan or it was the skinheads. I don't remember. But they were interviewing him because he was in a white supremacist group for a very long time. And then he got out of it. he quit. And he said, I was just a kid. Like, I had nowhere to go. I had no one to guide me. If it was one organization that took me, I would have taken on their beliefs as well, but it just happened to be this one. And I remembered that. I saw this a few years ago, but I remembered that because that's why you have all of these different organizations going into prisons and various things. That's how they got Malcolm X. The Nation of Islam, they came in the prisons, they were talking to the guys, and they reformed their entire life. They got them off the streets and into responsibility. The old Nation of Islam. And they still do that to this day. Like, I'm not knocking any belief system or anything, but sometimes all it takes is at least one moral organization or one moral person to just go in there and transform the life of a young person or a misguided person. So let's see what happens. Children running, hide near bridge, kindly faces, orphanage. Oh, they found an orphanage. Look at this. They're smiling. Okay. Months of waiting, orphans clean, benches crowded, scrunched between. Some must journey, just a few, picking children, you. So look at Lucy right here. She has her brothers. She's trying to keep them together. She's trying. She's a little girl with the world on her shoulders. At least she's trying to keep their family together. I don't know what this lady is doing. I guess she's like noting the children. I don't know. But they got them off the streets and feeding them. And now they're about to, I don't know, sell them. How many of these children were actually orphans? How many of them? You remember a few years ago, I don't know how many years ago it was, where there were these missionaries, I believe they went to Haiti, and they were trying to steal some children. They're like, oh no, we're helping them. But they're literally trying to steal some children to set up for adoption or whatever. Railroad station, boisterous crowds, screeching engines, whistles loud. Train for orphans, miles of track, Lucy wide-eyed, looking back. So look, all the children on the train. This is very traumatic. Even though it's a little rhyming book and the author and the illustrator are doing this so beautifully, like for me, it's personally very traumatic because I'm just reminded of enslavement. You are literally uprooting yourself. Like your parents are dead, or if you were enslaved, your parents were sold or beaten or lynched or something. You don't know what is going to happen to you. And you're on this train to a completely different place that you're not familiar with, hoping your family stays together, and you're trying to keep it all together so you won't have some type of mental breakdown. That's why Lucy is the only one that looks worried. Look, all the children are like, hello, goodbye, and all the people like, hello, bye, have fun. Okay. But look at Lucy. Harold wiggles, swinging feet. David sleepy, slumped in seat. Station nearing, whistle blows, wiping faces, smoothing clothes. I don't even think some of them realize what's happening. I don't. Do they understand what's going on? That was the question I had with this picture. They're like, okay, I'm going to the train station. Okay, we gotta get the children ready. Like, kind of during enslavement, where they would like oil up the black people for the auction block. It was like, okay, you gotta get ready because we're gonna have some buyers here. That's what it reminds me of. So I'm like, do these children even understand what's happening? What's about to happen to them? Lines of orphans on display. David chosen, pulled away. Harold waving, Lucy cries, blowing kisses, last goodbyes. Now they know that wasn't right. They know that wasn't right. They could have kept these siblings together. But look at the society you're living in. You're going to tear a mother away from her newborn baby. You don't care. And Harold's just like, bye. No, David's like, bye, bye. I'll see you later. And Lucy's like, oh my God. Lurching, jerking, clickety-clack, chugging, puffing down the track. Days of travel, passing crops, railroad station, engines stop. Now, why in the planet? Like, not only did you take David away, you took him away to a whole different town. Didn't y'all know they were related, at least? Why can't you just, if you're gonna sell them, why don't you just sell them as a family then? If you're inevitably going to sell them, why don't you sell them as an entire trio? But instead, you decide to break up this whole family and just space them apart. That's why after the 13th Amendment, after enslavement ended, there would be Black people walking down the road, looking into each other's eyes, looking into each other's faces to see if it was their relative, if it was their loved one that had been sold away, if they could find them. There were stories of Black people that had been married, whose marriage was destroyed by enslavement. They got remarried, and their new spouse came to find them and came home to find a completely different spouse. Like, what the heck? So traumatic. Small feet scuffle, shuffle, walk. Lines of children, townsfolk gawk. Look at these townfolks. Standing stiffly, heads held high, Harold taken, waves goodbye. Oh my goodness, Harold. Now look at Lucy. She's like, oh my God, my other sibling's gone now. Oh, man, poor Lucy. Lucy sniffles, one big tear. Wife of farmer pulls her near. Well, look, at least she's with a kind person. Look at this. She's like, come on, little girl, you're coming with me. Ride to farmhouse, horse and cart, warm from oven, apple tart, feather pillow, hand-stitched quilt, Lucy sighing, twinge of guilt. Harold, David, where'd you go? Are you happy? Will I know? This was probably the most depressing page of the book. Not the children being torn away from each other, just the after effects of the children being torn away. It says twinge of guilt. Lucy sighing, twinge of guilt. She has the survivor's guilt, you know. She's like, well, I'm in a good place and I'm being fed and clothed and these people are nice and I'm having an okay time. But what about my brothers? What about Harold? What about David? Are they okay? Are they eating? Are they cold? It's like a torture that never ends. It's almost like when you have a parent of a missing child and you don't know where your child is, you don't know who has your child, what's going on. It'd almost be better if they were dead. At least you know where they are, even though that's horrible to say. But at least when you have someone that's passed away, you're like, okay, they're passed away, they're in the ground or they're cremated, their soul is in a better place. But when you have no answers, you never have any type of mental rest. And I'm sure Lucy is wondering every day, thinking about her brothers. Even every time she smiles or is happy, she's thinking about where did they go? Now for like a person of color that was enslaved, it'd probably be 10 times worse, because it's like, oh man, haven't seen them in years. They probably were lynched. Maybe they got sold down south. Maybe my baby is like being whipped right now. Like, that's why a lot of mothers that birthed their children during enslavement would kill their children. That's like what's her name? Margaret Garner, who killed her 2-year-old so her 2-year-old wouldn't have to suffer from enslavement. And Toni Morrison based her book Beloved off of that incident. So, and then there's another story of Nat Turner's mother trying to kill him when he was born, but I don't know if that's true or not. But the Margaret Garner story definitely happened, because she also tried to grab her other child. That's just how horrible enslavement was. That's just how horrible it feels when you are the survivor of a traumatic event. Lucy milking gathers oats, feeding chickens, geese, and goats, slowly learning, day by day. Lucy giggles, "Go, don't play." So now, somehow she's getting closure that she possibly won't see her children or her brothers again. So she's starting to somewhat have a normal childhood, and like, oh well, it is what it is. I guess I'll just be feeding these goats. I'll find some type of happiness, because I can't change my situation. So I guess I'll just make the best of it. And she's learning, they're teaching her how to provide for herself. Sunday service, wood pews hard. There is Harold in the yard. Look, the first time she's smiling. Look at so beautiful. Look, it's Harold. Oh my goodness. I'm so happy for her. I'm so happy. It says Harold shouting, joyous cheers, Lucy running, happy tears. Oh, look, I freaking cried. I don't even cry with children's books, but this book made me cry. I was just like, Jesus back. Harold is back. I'm so happy for her. And they're so happy to see each other. Look at them. I'm so happy for her. Thoughts of David, far away. Prayers they'll find him safe someday. So even though it's happy, you're still missing one sibling, David. And it's somewhat of closure, but it's not at the same time. But I think this book was so good. This was such a good book, and she told it in such a poetic way. Very intense subject matter, but she put it where it wouldn't be so traumatizing. But she left room for, I guess, discussion. And the illustrator did such a good job capturing the emotions and the beauty of it. Like, even if you didn't read anything, just looking at the pictures and the details, the vivid colors, the farmhouses. I am definitely keeping this book in my collection, and I will be reading more about the Orphan Trains. I'll probably do a book in the future, or a book review in the future about the Orphan Trains. Not a children's book, but an adult book to read and give you more information about it, because I do see parallels between these orphan trains. What was that? Between these orphan trains and the enslavement of Black people. So thank you all for watching this video, and happy reading to you. See you next time.